There is a quiet phenomenon unfolding across the modern world, yet very few have the language or the courage to name it. A silent migration is taking place, not across borders or territories, but across states of consciousness. The most self-aware, psychologically mature, spiritually sensitive individuals are not making loud revolutions, nor are they storming the gates of institutions. They are simply stepping away, leaving without fanfare, vanishing without bitterness, receding from the noise of collective life into a depth that most cannot follow. This is not rebellion. It is not bitterness. It is not a dramatic outcry against a corrupt system. It is something far more profound. The soul's refusal to continue betraying itself by remaining immersed in a sea of unconsciousness. Carl Jung foresaw this. He called it the necessary withdrawal. For those whose psychological eyes have opened, continuing to participate in the collective dream becomes almost intolerable. Not symbolically painful, physically painful, emotionally corrosive, spiritually suffocating. When consciousness rises beyond a certain threshold, the body and psyche no longer allow immersion in mass unconsciousness without revolt. What looks like detachment from the outside is actually self-preservation from the inside. Think about it. The deeper you awaken, the harder it becomes to play along with the illusions that keep society functioning. What many call normal life, chasing status, performing roles, echoing opinions that are not their own, drowning in distractions, is sustained by a hidden agreement. Let us all remain unconscious together. But once the veil lifts, you cannot unsee what you see. You recognize projections, shadow games, roles performed without awareness. You begin to hear, beneath ordinary conversation, the grinding machinery of denial and repression. For Jung, this was not a philosophical theory, but a personal ordeal. As his own consciousness expanded, he found himself less and less capable of enduring ordinary social encounters. Imagine being awake in a room full of sleepers who insist they are already awake. Imagine holding in your mind the knowledge of what lurks beneath people's masks, yet being forced to smile and nod as though you don't. Every interaction demanded that Jung silence what he knew, dim what he saw, pretend he did not understand. The strain was immense. This, he realized, is the curse of heightened consciousness. You remain among people, yet feel utterly alone. You may stand in the middle of a crowd, but you are speaking a language no one else understands. The cost of bridging the gulf between your reality and theirs becomes unbearable. To remain, you must constantly translate depth into shallow words, constantly lower your vision to match surfaces, constantly mute the insights that burn within you. It is not arrogance, it is exhaustion. So people begin to disappear. They stop posting online. They leave conversations midstream. They distance themselves from relationships that require performance over truth. They walk away from careers that demand endless persona masks. They are not rejecting humanity. They are protecting their consciousness. They are refusing to sell their authenticity, to remain in systems that reward only conformity. Jung taught that as you integrate your own shadow, the darkness within, you that you once denied witnessing, society's endless shadow projections becomes unbearable. You see it everywhere. One political tribe demonizing the other, social movements scapegoating outsiders, online mobs raging against imagined enemies. What others call justice or morality, you see as raw projection. People battling with their own unacknowledged darkness, externalized and disguised as righteousness. It feels like watching an epidemic of unconsciousness, a collective psychosis dressed in the costume of conviction. And once you recognize this, how can you go back? How can you chant with the crowd when you see that the crowd is at war with itself? How can you pick a side when both sides are shadows projected in opposite directions? How can you sacrifice your consciousness on the altar of belonging when every cell of your being revolts against it? Withdrawal then is not a collapse but an act of survival. Jung emphasized that those who choose solitude are not antisocial. They are too conscious for the current social container. The psyche demands distance to preserve what has been painfully, carefully awakened. Many who find themselves in this place feel guilt. They ask, am I running away? Am I abandoning the world when it needs consciousness most? But Jung would answer differently. You are not abandoning the world, you are refusing to drown in it. You are creating space where consciousness can survive. Let's pause here. If, as you listen or read, you recognize yourself, if you felt the pull to step away from noise, to leave the endless echo chambers, to disappear into stillness, understand this: you are not broken. You are not strange. You are not antisocial. You are simply too awake to tolerate what others still call normal. Jung would tell you this is not escapism. It is necessity. And if this resonates, let me encourage you, stay connected here. Share your reflections below, because your voice may be the echo someone else needs to hear. Subscribe if you want to walk further on this path with me, because together we are mapping a terrain that many are only just beginning to glimpse. The path of individuation, the unfolding of the true self, requires periods of withdrawal. Jung called this the burden of seeing, and the deeper you see, the more solitude you will require. This is not the end of the journey. It is the preparation for its next stage. And if this resonates with you, if you felt that strange pull to step away from the noise, to stop pretending, to protect your consciousness, then I want to invite you to do something simple yet powerful. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your words may be the light another awakening soul needs to read. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so you don't walk this journey alone. Every step into consciousness is lighter when walked together. As Jung's work deepened, he uncovered a truth that many people today are only beginning to realize. Society itself is a vast theater of masks. What we call daily life is less a reflection of reality and more a constant performance of personas, roles carefully maintained so that the machinery of culture keeps running. Most people never question this performance because they have never known anything else. They think their persona is their identity. But for the one who has tasted individuation, the false self can no longer be sustained. This is the second great reason why the awakened disappear. When you have glimpsed the self, the raw, unmasked truth of who you are, you cannot go back to pretending. Performing your role in a boardroom, at a dinner party, on social media, begins to feel like an unbearable lie. What used to feel normal now feels like suffocation. And it is not a matter of willpower. You cannot force yourself back into a mask once it has been shattered. Jung described his own battle with this. After his confrontation with the unconscious, he could no longer function as the proper Swiss psychiatrist, endlessly conforming to academic expectations and social conventions. His authenticity rebelled against the performance. So he retreated to Bollingen, his stone tower by the lake, not to hide but to breathe, to live without pretending, to listen to his soul rather than the demands of society. This retreat was not selfish, it was pro-authentic, and this is why so many awakened people today are quietly leaving the systems they once thrived in. Executives step away from careers that demand constant image management. Teachers withdraw from institutions that prioritize performance over truth. Relationships built on roles dissolve not from hatred, but because pretending is no longer possible. Authenticity becomes more valuable than belonging, and truth becomes more vital than acceptance. One of Jung's analysans, a woman who had reached a deep stage of individuation, put it with piercing clarity: "Every meeting I attended required me to act like someone I wasn't. Every conversation was a mask. My true voice had no place there. I realized I wasn't sick, I was suffocating." Slowly, she left her corporate life behind. Not in disgrace, but in triumph. She chose realness over performance, integrity over applause. The more conscious a person becomes, the more impossible it is to remain in spaces where only masks are welcome. To the unconscious, persona feels natural. To the awakened, persona feels like death, and so they walk away, not because they hate society, but because they can no longer betray themselves to remain in it. This is why Jung insisted that individuation often carries a hermit phase, a season where one must withdraw to integrate. In solitude, the false selves fall away. In silence, the authentic self gathers strength. Withdrawal becomes the womb where the soul matures, unseen but essential. Without it, the self withers under the weight of constant performance. But let us be clear, withdrawal is not the end of the story. It is a stage, an archetype. The hermit does not vanish to escape responsibility. The hermit withdraws to prepare, to integrate, to cultivate wisdom, to hold a depth that cannot be developed under the constant pressure of the crowd. When this phase is complete, some return, not to rejoin unconsciousness, but to stand at the edges of society, guiding those ready to awaken. At this point, a natural tension arises. The collective often sees withdrawal as betrayal. Why are the most thoughtful people leaving? Why do the wisest voices grow quiet? The truth is that they have not abandoned humanity. They are pioneering new ground for it. They are carving out spaces where consciousness can breathe, so that when others are ready, there will be a path. And this is where you might recognize yourself. Perhaps you feel the pull to stop performing, to take off the mask, to disappear into silence for a while. You wonder if that means you are failing, if it makes you weak. But Jung would remind you, it is not weakness, it is necessity. You are protecting the fragile flame of yourself from the storm of unconsciousness. If you are here, if these words strike a deep chord in you, then I want to ask something of you. Write this phrase in the comments, not just as an act of participation, but as a personal declaration. I choose authenticity over performance. Let that phrase mark your presence here, and let it also mark the decision within you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, because this journey is not meant to be carried alone. Together we are building the conscious edges of a world that has not yet awakened. Withdrawal, then, is not failure. It is transformation. It is the cocoon stage of the soul. The caterpillar must vanish into darkness before it emerges with wings. Jung's insight was not that we should avoid society forever, but that we must protect our inner transformation until it is strong enough to withstand contact with the outer world. So if you find yourself unable to perform, unable to pretend, unable to wear masks that once fit, know this: you are not broken. You are not antisocial. You are awakening, and your solitude is not a collapse. It is a sacred preparation. Jung uncovered something that remains radically uncomfortable even today. The cost of maintaining consciousness inside unconscious environments is so immense that it often manifests as illness, fatigue, or despair. To the casual observer, these symptoms look like weakness. But to the psychologically awake, they are signals. The psyche's cry that too much energy is being drained by an environment hostile to authenticity. Think of the conscious individual like someone swimming upstream against a raging current. For most, drifting with the river feels natural, effortless, but for the one who has awakened, there is no choice but to resist the current, to hold their ground, to swim against illusions. Over time, exhaustion sets in. Jung called this invisible strain psychological labor, the hidden effort required simply to remain awake in a sleeping world. This labor takes many forms. It is the effort of filtering projections hurled unconsciously in every interaction. It is the effort of maintaining boundaries when surrounded by people who bleed their unprocessed material into every conversation. It is the effort of translating depth into surface language so that others can tolerate it. It is the effort of not matching the unconscious frequency of anger, envy, or fear that swirls around in collective spaces. For those still asleep, none of this is difficult. They simply ride the current. But for the awakened, it is like carrying a mountain in silence. No wonder Jung's most conscious patients often developed mysterious fatigue, depression, or even physical ailments. Doctors would find nothing medically wrong, yet their lives were being consumed by the relentless task of defending their consciousness. Jung's analysis revealed that the cure was not medication nor endless self-discipline. It was withdrawal. To step out of the river before drowning. One story he told illustrates this perfectly. A teacher deeply committed to her students had spent years on her own inner work. She was awake, sensitive, profoundly self-aware, and yet she became chronically ill. Her energy evaporated. She could barely rise each morning. After months of searching for answers, Jung helped her see. She wasn't sick. She was exhausted from maintaining consciousness in an ocean of unconscious projections all day long. Every class, every staff meeting, every hallway conversation drained her reserves. When she finally left teaching and moved into solitude in nature, her health returned within weeks. Not because she had rested, but because the psychic storm surrounding her had ceased. This is why so many awakened people today vanish into forests, mountains, or small, quiet communities. They are not hiding from the world. They are protecting their consciousness from being devoured by it. They recognize that consciousness is precious, fragile in its early stages, and easily eroded by immersion in unconsciousness. To protect it is not cowardice, it is wisdom. And Jung saw that this withdrawal follows an archetypal pattern, the Hermit. Every individuating person, sooner or later, must enter a season of withdrawal, not as escape but as necessity. The hermit phase is where the integration happens, where the self is consolidated, where the fragments gather into wholeness. Without this sacred silence, transformation remains incomplete, yet the collective often misunderstands. Friends call it antisocial, families interpret it as rejection, society brands it as failure. But Jung knew better. This solitude is gestation. Just as a seed cannot sprout under constant disturbance, the soul cannot mature under constant interference. The hermit is not abandoning the collective, but preparing for a new form of contribution. One of Jung's analysens, a philosopher, disappeared entirely from academic life for 3 years. To colleagues, it looked like a breakdown. In truth, it was a breakthrough. In his solitude, he integrated insights that would have been impossible in the noise of academia. When he returned, he brought forth ideas that reshaped entire fields of thought. Withdrawal had not been abandonment. It had been incubation. This is the paradox. The awakened vanish, but not to disappear forever. They vanish to return differently, to re-enter not as unconscious participants, but as carriers of depth, as border dwellers who live at the edges of society, close enough to touch it, but too awake to be consumed by it. Artists, healers, writers, guides, each one offering fragments of the consciousness they cultivated in silence. You may feel this pull yourself. The sense that ordinary environments are draining the life out of you, that your energy leaks away in conversations that mean nothing, that every day of performance leaves you emptier. If so, recognize it not as weakness, but as a sign. Your psyche may be urging you toward your hermit phase, and I want to invite you to affirm this. If these words resonate, leave this phrase in the comments as both a declaration and a reminder to yourself. My solitude is not escape, it is preparation. Write it and let it echo into your own consciousness. And while you are here, subscribe so you continue walking this journey with others who are also navigating their withdrawal. Because although the hermit phase is solitary, it helps to know there are others building their own towers of silence around the world. Jung insisted that the hermit archetype is not permanent. It is a season, a cocoon, not a coffin. Its purpose is not to end your connection to humanity, but to transform it. Only after the hermit phase can the awakened return with gifts the collective desperately needs. But those gifts cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, cannot be birthed in the glare of constant social demand. They require the soil of silence. So if you feel the call of solitude, do not resist it. Listen, let yourself withdraw with purpose. Create a sacred space where your consciousness can strengthen. Trust that this is not the end, but the deepening of your story. And when the time comes, you will emerge not weaker, but whole. Not empty, but overflowing. Jung often reminded his students that individuation is not a straight line, but a spiral. One descends into the depths, withdraws, integrates, and eventually emerges, but never at the same place they began. Withdrawal is not regression. It is revolution at the deepest level of the psyche. And what seems like stepping away is, in truth, stepping inward, into the labyrinth of the self. In this labyrinth, old structures collapse. The persona you once depended on for belonging falls away. The projections you once believed about yourself dissolve. Even the familiar maps of religion, politics, or culture no longer provide guidance. It feels like disorientation. Yet Jung argued that this loss of direction is necessary. Only when the old scaffolding crumbles can the self emerge in its fullness. This is why so many who enter the hermit phase experience a profound sense of death. Not physical death, but the death of an identity. The teacher who leaves her classroom. The executive who resigns from a role of power. The artist who stops performing for applause. Each feels like they are burying a version of themselves. But in truth, they are making room for a new birth. The self cannot share space with masks. Something must die for something greater to be born. And the world misunderstands this process. To those still caught in unconsciousness, the disappearance of the awakened looks like failure. She gave up. He couldn't handle the pressure. They wasted their potential. But Jung would say what looks like waste to society is nourishment to the soul. For what use is outward success if it costs you your authentic self? What use is a glittering persona if your inner voice is silenced? The awakened know this intuitively. They recognize that silence is more valuable than applause, solitude more nourishing than shallow company, authenticity more important than performance. And so they leave, not with bitterness but with quiet conviction. They trade recognition for integrity. They trade belonging for wholeness. Jung himself knew this path intimately. His retreat to Bollingen was not a luxury but a necessity. There, far from the noise of the collective, he carved stones with his own hands, walked alone by the lake, listened to the depths of his unconscious. These years were not wasted. They were the very foundation of his later contributions. Without Bollingen, there would be no Red Book, no mature Jungian psychology. His solitude gestated treasures for the collective, but treasures that could not have formed in the noise of the world. And so it is for all who walk this path today. Your solitude is not empty. It is pregnant with meaning. Every quiet hour is weaving strength into your consciousness. Every day away from the performance is giving breath to the self. You are not withdrawing to disappear, you are withdrawing to transform. But here lies a profound paradox. The awakened never truly return to the collective in the same way. Once you have seen, you cannot unsee. Once you have become authentic, you cannot fit into false roles again. This does not mean permanent exile. It means a new form of participation, at the margins, at the edges, where authenticity is allowed to breathe. Jung called such people border dwellers. They live close enough to touch society, but never so close as to be swallowed by it. These border dwellers become the artists who create from the depths, the healers who guide individuals through awakening, the writers who leave maps for other solitary travelers. They do not rejoin the mainstream, because the mainstream requires masks, but they do not abandon humanity either. They simply find new ways to serve without betraying their consciousness. One of Jung's patients, a therapist, illustrated this beautifully. After disappearing into solitude for 2 years, she returned not to her old practice, but to a new one. She worked only with those going through spiritual crisis, those whose lives were unraveling under the weight of awakening. To the outside world, her career looked smaller, less successful. But in truth, her work had become more precise, more authentic, infinitely more valuable. She was invisible to the many, but indispensable to the few. And perhaps that is the calling of the awakened, to stop chasing the crowd and begin nourishing the few. To stop striving for the spotlight and begin tending to the flame. To stop diluting their authenticity for mass appeal and begin preserving it for those truly ready to receive it. This is evolution, not escape. It is the soul's refusal to waste its treasures where they cannot be received. The awakened vanish from the collective, not because they hate it, but because they love truth too much to dilute it. They love consciousness too much to sacrifice it. They love authenticity too much to sell it for acceptance. And so, if you feel yourself on this path, if you sense that the life you once lived no longer fits, that the rooms you once entered no longer welcome your true voice, understand this is not failure. It is transformation. The walls are falling because something greater is trying to emerge, and I want you to mark that transformation here, in this space. Write these words in the comments, not just as an act of participation, but as a ritual declaration of your journey. I choose wholeness over conformity. Let that phrase anchor you, and let it remind others who read it that they are not alone. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so that even in your solitude, you remain connected to a community of others who are also choosing wholeness over the masks of the world. Remember this, the hermit phase is not a disappearance into nothingness, it is a return to essence. And when you emerge, you will not be the same, you will be more. Jung's vision of individuation was never about escaping life. It was about entering it fully, so fully that the masks, illusions, and projections could no longer be tolerated. The withdrawal of the awakened, then, is not abandonment. It is part of an ancient rhythm. Retreat, transformation, return. From prophets in the desert to monks in the cloister, from artists in exile to philosophers in solitude, history has always been shaped by those who disappeared for a time in order to re-emerge carrying treasures. The world may not understand it. Families may grieve it. Societies may mislabel it. But the pattern repeats because it is archetypal. Consciousness cannot develop in the constant noise of collective performance. It needs silence, distance, solitude. It needs the womb of withdrawal. And here is the hope Jung emphasized. The disappearance is never final. Those who step away do not vanish into nothingness. They return, but they return different. They no longer come back as personas playing roles, but as authentic selves carrying gifts. They do not seek to dominate the collective, but to seed it quietly with consciousness. They are not interested in mass appeal, but in depth. They become healers, artists, guides, companions for those who also begin to awaken. This return, however, is not to the center of society. It is always to the edges. Jung called such people border dwellers. They live at the margins, creating parallel structures, small communities, quiet sanctuaries where consciousness can survive. They are invisible to the mainstream, yet indispensable to those searching for authenticity. One awakened soul might write books that become lifelines for the few ready to read them. Another might dedicate themselves to a handful of patients in spiritual crisis. Another might create art that touches only a small audience, but touches them deeply. This is the new architecture of consciousness, not mass revolutions, but subtle beacons scattered across the world, preparing a path for the next wave. Jung believed this was how evolution worked. Not all awaken at once. The first wave disappears, builds the new spaces, then becomes a guide for the next. What appears to the collective as loss or betrayal is in fact preparation. The silence of the awakened is not emptiness, it is gestation. Their absence is not abandonment. It is construction, and maybe you have felt this inside yourself. The pull to leave what no longer fits. The exhaustion of maintaining masks. The grief of realizing that old roles and relationships cannot hold your authentic self. If so, know that you are not alone and you are not failing. You are walking a path as old as humanity itself, the path of the hermit, the path of individuation, the path of necessary withdrawal. Your disappearance, if you allow it, will not be wasted. It will shape you. It will integrate you. It will prepare you. And when you will return with gifts no one else could bring. Gifts of truth, depth, and authenticity. And here is what matters most. This is not selfish. The collective does not need more masks. It does not need more conformity. It does not need more half-awake participants. What it desperately needs are individuals who have become whole, even if that wholeness required solitude. When you withdraw, you are not abandoning humanity. You are preparing something for it. So if you feel the call to step away, let yourself. Create your own Bollingen, whether that is a cabin, a quiet room, or simply an inner space of silence. Protect your consciousness as the sacred flame it is. Refuse to pour it into sand. Do not waste it on performances that betray your soul. Allow yourself to disappear, not forever, but for now. For what emerges from that disappearance is not death, but evolution. Jung would tell you, disappear consciously. Withdraw with purpose, integrate in solitude, so that when you return not as another mask in the crowd, but as a self that cannot be shaken. And I want to invite you, before we close, to anchor this truth with a declaration. If this message resonates with you, write this phrase in the comments. My disappearance is evolution, not abandonment. Let it serve as both testimony and reminder. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, because here, we walk together through Jung's insights, mapping the path of individuation for all who feel the call of withdrawal. You are not weak for stepping away. You are not selfish for protecting your consciousness. You are not abandoning society. You are becoming the very thing it will one day need most. Withdraw, transform, return transformed. This is the rhythm. This is the path. This is the work.